Have you ever wondered how addiction works in the brain, or how somebody could do something for so long with so many negative consequences? Today I'm going to tell you a little bit about addiction in the brain simplified times a billion. So the main agenda is going to be a broad overview of what addiction looks like, the prefrontal cortex, midbrain, what a defective brain looks like, and how and why addiction is a disease. Some good food for thought is addiction actually comes from a Latin term meaning to give into slavery. Have you ever thought to yourself, why can't that person just stop? They lost so much over their lifetime. Well, this is a common thought when it comes to addicts. Another one is mom and dad or uncle or aunt drank for so long and somehow they were able to give it up. But with true addicts, it just doesn't work like that. If you were able to give it up, chances are you weren't truly addicted. A common thing that people think of when they think of addicts is they're junkies, they're good for nothing, they're better off dead. That's also far from the truth. Most people who suffer from addiction are actually fairly good people. They're just stuck in a very endless, vicious disease. Another common misconception is they don't want to stop using. Research actually shows that most addicts also crave stopping. It's just so hard to stop without treatment. I want to talk to you about two specific parts of the brain that play main roles in addiction. Mainly the midbrain, but first we're going to hit on the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is where you hold your personality, your decision making, your social behavior, pretty much where you hold your morals, where you value your family, your home, your loved ones, job, etc. A fun fact about the midbrain is, or about the prefrontal cortex, is when you go into what's known as a survival mode, the whole prefrontal cortex shuts down. Your brain is focused on one thing, and that is surviving. On to the midbrain. The midbrain is strictly responsible for getting food and water, your fight or flight response, and procreation for your race. The midbrain activates when we are threatened. When our life is in danger or our species is in danger, that's when it activates. You cannot activate it yourself. And when this activates, your prefrontal cortex completely shuts down. I want to talk a little bit about the pleasure and reward system. So, when a baby is born, usually one of the first things you do is feed the baby. What this does is send dopamine to the midbrain saying, hey, we really need this. Dopamine is a pleasure chemical that the midbrain uses to associate pleasurable things. So when it gets this for the first time, it's saying, hey, this is great, we need this as survival. This is good. This is going to be cataloged under a survival pleasure. The same also applies to intercourse. When humans have intercourse, there's a pleasure sense. the midbrain categorizes this as this is something we need to procreate for our race. When it comes to drugs, and when I say drugs, I mean any addictive stimulant, alcohol, cannabis, of course, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, even caffeine. Anything that you could be addicted to qualifies. What they do is they release dopamine. In addicts' brains, what happens is there's a defect to where the midbrain categorizes this massive amount of dopamine release as, hey, we need this. So the same place that the midbrain cataloged nutrients, as in food and water and everything that's essential to survival, that substance that they just got that massive amount of dopamine from gets put in that same category. So to kind of put it into perspective for somebody who's never suffered with any sort of addiction issues, imagine you're on a desert and you're on day 4 or 5 without a single drop of water. And your organs are shutting down, and I say, you can have this bottle of water, but I'm taking your kids and your home. Biologically, you will take my water. There's not a single person on this earth who could biologically turn down my water. So essentially, that's what an addict goes through on a daily basis. There's a cool science experiment I wanted to hit on as well. It had to do with mice. They took 2 groups of mice, 6 in each group, and each mouse they put a probe in the brain. 6 of them, the probe was inserted into the cortex. The other 6, the probe was inserted into the midbrain. What happened was there was 2 holes, one in each group of mice, and when they stuck their head through the hole, cocaine would be administered through the probe into either the cortex for the one group or the midbrain for the other group. So the group that the probe was inserted into the cortex, the mice tried the hole which administered the cocaine, that signaled the probe to administer the cocaine, but discontinued to do it after the first initial. What happened with the probe in the midbrain is they continued to administer cocaine to their midbrain until they died. They didn't play with the other mice. They did nothing but administer cocaine to their midbrain until they died. This is a really fun part of this speech. I really enjoyed making this slide. People always wonder how and why addiction is a disease. Because it's not like cancer, right? Well, the one big difference between cancer and addiction is the symptoms. Usually with cancer, you have very physical symptoms. With addiction, it's very behavioral. But I'm going to break it down a little bit for you guys. When it comes to addiction, it has to fit into this module. So you have to have an organ that is affected. There has to be a defect, and then there has to be symptoms to that defect. So, say with cancer, liver cancer, the disease, or the organ would be the liver. The defect would be an abnormal production of liver cells, and the symptoms would be jaundice. With addiction, it's a brain disease, so the organ would be the brain. The defect would be the midbrain. And the symptoms would be behavioral. What I like to give as an example is, say somebody has a brain tumor and they don't know about it, but the only symptoms that are showing are a change in personality. So all of a sudden somebody becomes very aggressive or arrogant or impulsive, and later find out that they have a brain tumor. But as society, if we find out that this person had a tumor, there's a lot of sympathy. However, addicts usually don't get that sympathy. In conclusion, addiction is a brain disease that affects the midbrain. The midbrain confuses drugs and categorizes them as an essential survival item like food and water. The prefrontal cortex is where we hold our moral beliefs and shuts down when we go into survival mode. Addiction fits into the disease module in this way. The affected organ is the brain. The defect is the midbrain. Symptoms are behavioral changes. Addiction is a dysregulation of the midbrain, where the pleasure and reward system is malfunctioned, usually resulting in loss of control, excessive cravings, and persistent use of drugs or alcohol despite negative consequences.